Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I'm president of the City Club's Board of Directors. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Amy Hanauer, founding executive director of Policy Matters Ohio. Today's forum will continue a discussion we facilitated at the City Club of Cleveland on socioeconomic challenges, related policy approaches, all amidst a continuing slow growth post-recession economy. As stated at its website, Policy Matters Ohio seeks to create a more vibrant, sustainable, and inclusive Ohio. The website also provides information on the organization's policy and research initiatives in 10 different categories, including, by the way, democracy and government, which of course is one of our favorite topics here at the Citadel of Free Speech. Ms. Hanauer earned her undergraduate degree from Cornell University and a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Prior to establishing Policy Matters Ohio, she performed research and policy work in several states and the District of Columbia. She decided to move to Cleveland in 1998, observing that Cleveland is a place, quote, where you can get something done. I think we'd all agree with that, wouldn't we? Ms. Hanauer's early work included a report on how working people were faring in Ohio, which turned into a 6-part feature series in the Akron Beacon Journal. She founded Policy Matters Ohio in 2000 and has expanded the organization to include offices in both Cleveland and Columbus. 2 brief items illustrate her speaker's stature and thought leadership. First, a few years ago at a rally at the Ohio State House before a reported 2,000 people, she made the sobering observation that, quote, to give a sense of how families are struggling, a record 4 out of every 10 school kids in Ohio now qualifies for subsidized lunch, end quote. PolitiFact later analyzed that comment and concluded that, quote, Hanauer's speech was spot on about the ratio of kids receiving subsidized lunch, end quote. And just this past Sunday, in an op-ed piece in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Ms. Hanauer previewed her City Club remarks, writing that, quote, in many ways we're going backward, with inequality getting worse and many young people feeling downwardly mobile, end quote, and further stating that, quote, the nation is not fully committed to a vibrant, equitable, sustainable, and inclusive future, end quote. She identified climate chaos, staggering inequality, too few jobs, and declining opportunity to escape poverty and join the middle class as the biggest current challenges, described 2 ideas to address those challenges, and very importantly, invited readers to come to the City Club Friday to learn more. So, here we are today to listen and ask questions during our Q&A session in about 30 minutes. I present, on behalf of the City Club of Cleveland, Amy Hanauer, founding executive director of Policy Matters Ohio.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you so much to everyone for being here. I thought my friends should be seated at one table, but I feel like my friends are sort of spread around the room. So I wanted to start by saying that if you're ever looking for someone to rehearse your speech on, think before you choose your 13-year-old daughter. Mine assured me that none of my jokes were funny and that nobody would know the word insurmountable. I also had to pay her $10 to use that last sentence. So as Paul said, I run Policy Matters, a think tank devoted to creating a more vibrant, equitable, sustainable, and inclusive Ohio. And I really encourage you to go to our website where you will find citations for the copious number of numbers that I will use today. So this is the first time I've been invited to speak at a Friday forum, although I've spoken on panels here, and I'm thrilled to be invited. But since I'm in the business of analyzing numbers, I calculate that if it takes another 14 years for me to return, the U.S. will have won the World Cup at least once. Cleveland will have won 14 NBA championships. I also project that we'll have full employment, a zero-emissions energy system, peace in the Middle East, and I will have nothing to say. Actually, Dan, let the record state that even if all of the above comes to pass, I will still have something to say. And if I don't, faithful WCPN listeners will know that my husband, Mark Cassell, sometimes known as Mark from Shaker or Mark from Streetsboro or Mark from Kent, depending on where on the road he is between our house and his job teaching political science at Kent State. In the highly unlikely event that I don't have anything to say, Mark will, so keep our family on the list. In seriousness, I'm very happy to be here and so excited to see the amazing lineup of speakers that the City Club has been and will be welcoming. Since I've been doing this work at Policy Matters, Ohio has lost jobs, seen its wages and incomes decline, and seen racial disparities endure and increase. So I'd have to say, in our mission of making the economy work for everyone, we're not really hitting it out of the park. That's because while progressives have had some great victories, the views of the terrific community organizers, worker representatives, environmentalists, and other allies all over this state are just generally not prevailing. So what does it mean to have an economy that works for everyone? I think it includes three main things: high productivity, high opportunity to contribute to and share in that productivity, and a way to anticipate and deal with our biggest societal problems, which of course change. To me, the current ones are inequality, over-incarceration, waste of both people and resources, and climate chaos. There may be people in the audience who don't care about one or more of these goals or disagree with me about what the major challenges are, but they seem like a reasonable starting place for a society that works not just for the few, but for everyone. We never did a perfect job with these three things, but we used to do a much better job than we are today. In the 30 years following World War II, we passed a number of major policies to make sure that we were creating decent jobs, that our productivity was growing, that workers were sharing in that growth, and that we were addressing at least some of our major societal challenges. The good news is that I think we, as a country, as a state, and sometimes even as communities, can pull it together and address these problems, maybe even better than before. These are not insurmountable. There's that word. Does everybody know what that means? It's a matter of public choices. We choose the kind of economy we want to have. In the post-war period, we chose to have an economy where prosperity was, with some very important limits around race and gender, somewhat broadly shared. In the past few decades, we are choosing an economy in which most of our strong productivity growth goes to the very wealthiest. So we have to decide what we want. Now, comprehensively addressing all four of these might take more than half an hour, even for someone from New Jersey who speaks quickly. So I will just say a little bit about the tools to ensure job quality and decent wages before moving on to how we include everybody, which is my main focus today. The modern economy has paradoxically pushed many more parents into the workplace while also delivering less secure, more sporadic hours for some workers and more demands to have multiple jobs or work overtime for others. We've gone backwards on paid sick days, and we don't ensure paid family leave, even as we expect people to juggle home and work responsibilities. In the past, we had a higher and regularly rising minimum wage, a social contract between business and society that said that many jobs came with retirement, health care, and a reasonable work week, and a willingness to let workers stick together and bargain collectively through unions. I worry that we are letting all three of these things weaken substantially. The federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour, it is a bit higher here, would be over $18 an hour if it had kept pace with productivity growth. It now hasn't changed since 2009, 5 years. The social contract, with the important exception of access to health care, not my area of expertise, I think John Corlette's here, so ask him those questions, has substantially eroded. And worst of all to me, unions are a fraction of their former strength. This is a problem because supportive elected officials come and go, while unions once created an enduring voice for workers. I have yet to see any other mechanism that can deliver an economy where working people really share in the benefits. So job quality matters, and it's not being delivered. But today I'm mostly focusing on job creation in both the public and private sectors. Happily, the sectors I focus on will also increase our productivity, reduce waste of both people and energy, and address some societal problems. So they're what some might call triple bottom line solutions that do more than one of the things I talked about at the beginning. In the US in general, and in Ohio even more so, we are not creating the number of jobs or the number of good jobs that we need. What this means is that people are remaining jobless or trapped in bad jobs for far too long. It's hard to fully capture the long-term harm this does to people, families, communities, and our economy. Joblessness obviously means people get poorer, they exhaust their savings, they get evicted, they get foreclosed upon, they take out payday loans, all of the obvious things associated with not having a paycheck. But it's a lot more than that. People's skills erode, their health declines, they become less and less likely with each passing month to ever get a good job again. Their families can break up and their children can become less likely to thrive in school and in future careers. Unemployment has permanent, tangible costs to society that too often go unquantified. Of course, it also means that these people, their skills, their muscles, their ideas, their drive, are not being tapped, which means we're less productive than we should be. Ohio is currently still more than 100,000 jobs below the number we had before the most recent recession, and more than 330,000 jobs below the number we had before the 2000s recession. After earlier recessions, within 3 or 3.5 years, we fully recovered jobs lost. In contrast, we still haven't gained back the jobs that disappeared in the last 2 recessions, more than 6 and 13 long years later. For those without jobs, the results can be brutal. The share of Ohio children living in deep poverty, at less than 50% of the federal poverty level, rose from 9 to 12% in recent years. Those families are living on less than $10,000 a year. I'm told this room holds 250 people. That means if we took 2 Friday forums with decent crowds, we'd have all spent more on those 2 lunches than these 3-person families live on in a year. Even for those who have a job, many earn such low wages that they cannot pay for basics. Of the 12 largest occupational categories in Ohio, just 1 pays a median annual wage that can meet a basic family budget at full-time hours for a family with a single working parent, an infant, and a preschooler. So it's urgent that we address our high levels of joblessness and of bad jobs. Now, I admit there's actually a limited amount that states can do to improve the underlying economy. A lot depends on the industrial mix you have, and all the Midwestern states have struggled with our manufacturing concentration. And since states do have to balance their budgets, it can be hard to generate demand at the state level. But there are a few things states can control. First, we can invest in education from pre-K through retirement. And the states that do more of this do much better. More on education in a minute. Second, there is one sector that policy really can control: public jobs. After the 81 and 90 recessions, Ohio added public jobs, providing a counter-cyclical boost to the economy, providing more of the services that families need when they're struggling financially, and getting projects done while it was cheaper to do them in a down economy. Win, win, win. Between the start of this recession and last summer, the country as a whole had added slightly, and Ohio had cut 6.4% of its public jobs, further weakening a poor employment situation. So at a time when there weren't enough jobs, we took the jobs we had most control over and got rid of 6 out of every 10 of them. 6 out of every 100 of them, sorry. This meant not only that the displaced teachers, firefighters, social workers, and bus drivers were unavailable to deliver valuable services to Ohioans, but it also meant that those teachers and drivers didn't have money to spend, making our overall economy weaker and creating a downward spiral. They didn't buy new school shoes, they didn't go to the corner diner, they laid off the babysitter. So in addition to retaining and rehiring existing public workers, we also have many needs in our communities which currently unemployed or underemployed workers can fill. Filling these needs would employ people now and position us better for tomorrow. So a quick economics lesson. A lot of these ideas come from John Maynard Keynes, the economist whose thinking underscores much of the economics devoted to creating demand for labor. Okay, actually, maybe this is a psychology lesson. But in late 2008, when I had been running an economic policy research institute for nearly 9 years, my father sent me an email asking, "Did you ever take any economics in college?" and pasting in the Wikipedia definition of Keynesianism. So, in fairness, my father is proud and supportive of policy matters, but the correct answer is that yes, I know who Keynes is, and yes, I've taken econ. So Keynes famously said you could improve the economy by paying people to dig holes and fill them back in. Fortunately, that isn't necessary because we have many things we can pay people to do that we actually need done. I want to focus on 2 of them. The first is human capital. America created one of the world's first K-12 education systems, and with the GI Bill, we catapulted ourselves to being, in many ways, the most educated country on the planet. It was terrific for our growth in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But we are no longer making the new investments needed so that young Ohioans can be ready to thrive and excel in our new, more demanding economy. And other states, not to mention other countries, are passing us by. Now, to be clear, Ohioans have become much more educated, and our increasing education, Ohio and nationally, has made us more productive. I'll actually give some of these numbers at the end. As I mentioned, increasing productivity on its own does not guarantee that workers share in that growth. That's why we need more unions and better workplace norms. But it is a good employment strategy that improves lives, and states that do more of it do better, much better. So it starts with high-quality early childcare for infants and toddlers. We have leaders on that issue in this room, or Marcia's in this room. Quality care gets kids off on the right foot, and for poor parents, it helps them keep jobs that don't pay enough to cover this expensive necessity. But Ohio has gone backwards and now has one of the lowest eligibility rates in the nation for state child care assistance. Eligibility was reduced from 150 to 125% of the poverty level in the last budget. So if you earn $25,000, you won't become eligible for help with child care, but about half of your income is sucked up by child care costs before you even get to paying for rent, food, transportation, and diapers. Next comes pre-K. I was very happy last Friday when Governor Kasich and Columbus Mayor Coleman announced a small initiative to expand preschool for kids in Columbus. That's great. The City and School District of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County have also taken leadership on this issue. But let's not deceive ourselves. We are not keeping pace with countries and states that are putting in place universal, high-quality pre-K for all 3- and 4-year-olds. We were once a leader under Governor Voinovich on state-funded Head Start. Recently, Ohio ranked 37th for enrolling 4-year-olds in state-funded pre-K in 2012. Okay, investing in early education is a great way to create demand for workers and reduce unemployment now, a theme is emerging, while permanently improving lives and reducing future costs. Kids who get pre-K are more likely to thrive in elementary school, less likely to need remedial education, more likely to graduate, less likely to be incarcerated, more likely to attend college, less likely to have a baby before they can care for her, more likely to get a job, and less likely to need public assistance. Ohio's taking some nice baby steps, but Oklahoma and other states are passing us by, and we're dooming ourselves to lower future tax revenue and higher future costs for remedial education, incarceration, and public assistance. K-12. Make no mistake, you can get a great free public education in this country. I did in New Jersey, my husband did in California, my kids are in Shaker Heights, Ohio. But not every district is Shaker Heights. In Ohio, state funding for K-12 education in this budget is more than $600 million lower than it was in 2010-2011. When we surveyed districts about this last year, 70% said they were cutting their budgets, doing things like laying off teachers, getting rid of aides, raising class sizes, eliminating course offerings. Okay, higher education. This is also a daunting, I wish I would get to the happy part. And damning story in Ohio. Ohio has slashed aid for college students by 1/3 over the past 10 years. We invest less in need-based aid per full-time undergraduate than any Midwestern state. Ohio devotes less than it used to funding higher ed and less than other states. We now rank 41st in the share of our income that we spend funding higher education. As a result, tuition has soared. We have the 6th highest share of graduates leaving with debt and the 9th highest average debt load. Appalling. So we should be doing deep investments in all of these areas. It would mean rehiring a bunch of teachers and other school personnel we've laid off. It would also mean hiring many ambitious new young people struggling to find a foothold in our economy. And it would mean that many people in Ohio would be better positioned for their own educational and eventual job success. Again, win, win, win. Okay, enough depressing facts about how Ohio is failing the next generation. My other favorite area for investment is in conservation and green energy. This can be done with a mix of creating public jobs and creating better policy that generates more private jobs. I wish I could give a better analysis of Ohio's approach in this area. But alas, we spend a lot in energy in Ohio, about 10% of our gross state product. We waste a lot of energy in our inefficient electrical grid, our fuel-guzzling cars, and our leaky buildings, and we pollute a lot. In 2008, we put in place clean energy standards that required electric companies to reduce energy use by 22% by the year 2025 and to generate 12.5% of energy from renewable sources, again, slowly phased in by 2025. It was a carefully crafted bipartisan compromise, and I see a lot of people in this room who were involved in getting that compromise through. And the policy works. Utilities were investing in clean energy, creating jobs, creating a market for renewables, reducing our consumption of polluting, largely imported fossil fuels. They were producing and buying more wind and solar and putting in place programs to help manufacturers, businesses, and households reduce consumption and upgrade their buildings. We just became the first state ever to freeze clean energy standards. We essentially hung up a big sign on our interstate telling wind turbine manufacturers that this is not a place to invest, and telling people who care about the future of our planet, particularly young people who care so much about this issue, that we don't share that concern. Frankly, it's mortifying. We committed to continued inefficient use of energy. Currently, we lose nearly 70% of energy during generation and transmission, basically throwing out 2 out of every 3 lumps of coal we use. This is a tremendous waste of money. My researcher tells me nearly $20 billion a year, even though I always question that number because it seems so big. Imagine what we could do with that money. In case it hasn't come through, I have a couple of ideas. So studies have found that every $1 million we spend upgrading homes and businesses creates 17 jobs. Instead of going backwards, we should be insulating every public building in Ohio, doing it with union labor, and working with the building trades to create opportunities for a more diverse building trades workforce as we do so. We should weatherize the home of every low-income family who struggles with its high energy costs. We should also encourage utilities to let private building owners retrofit and finance it off of the savings on their energy bills. This brings lower prices for owners and job creation for insulators, solar panel producers, and construction workers. We can bring the same pro-worker, pro-diverse workforce standards onto these private jobs. Utilities in at least 23 states are doing or getting ready to do some form of this. Transit is another crucial way to green the economy while delivering other benefits. In 2010, Ohio tied with South Dakota for the 8th lowest investment of state-sourced funds among the 46 states that put money into transit. Ohio, South Dakota. Do these seem like states at a similar level of density to you? We have big urban populations and growing numbers of young people who would love to ride transit to work. Hell, I even know a few middle-aged people who would love to ride transit to work. Promoting transit increases vibrancy, reduces use of polluting fossil fuels, employs people, encourages biking. I had to get that in somehow because I like biking. And makes it easier for poor families who can't afford a car to keep a job. So investments in the green infrastructure, like the human capital investments, would employ people now, reduce unemployment and poverty, and stimulate our still too slow economy. We have a phenomenal automobile parts-making infrastructure in Ohio, and I think I have friends in the audience today who both produce those parts as workers and who own companies that supply this industry. Because of that, we make parts for wind turbines, solar panels, and building retrofits so that this investment would create both construction and manufacturing jobs here. We'd end up with lower energy bills, preserving resources for other smart investments. We'd emit less carbon and pollution, leaving our air cleaner and our planet less prone to crazy weather. Okay, I tend to focus on things that I think will lower emissions and reduce energy use, but there are other needed job-creating infrastructure improvements. Come hear Jim Rokakis in a few weeks talking about how demolishing blighted properties can create jobs and improve neighborhoods. He's a national leader in this area, but I bet he'll be the first to say we're not putting enough money into it. What all these ideas share is that they reduce future public costs, they reduce waste, either waste of people or waste of resources, they employ people now, they make our lives better, our kids higher achieving, our prisons less full, our air less polluted, our asthma rates lower, and our climate less chaotic. All of these constitute what many people are now calling a middle-out approach. They grow the economy from the middle out. But that's not really the approach we've been taking in Ohio. We've instead taken a discredited trickle-down approach. We've decided over and over again that we would rather have larger class sizes, fewer language offerings, higher college tuitions, lower student aid, fewer bus routes, more wasteful buildings, and fewer pre-K slots, because we'd rather give enormous tax breaks to the wealthiest and corporations in Ohio. 9 years ago, in 2005, the Ohio General Assembly passed an extraordinary set of tax cuts, justified on the promise that they would create jobs. It has not worked. We've actually lost jobs since those cuts were put in place. It's not just because the national economy was weak. Since the cuts were implemented, Ohio has had the 4th worst job growth rate among states. When we last counted, Ohio had lost more than 109,000 jobs since the phase-in began. Over that time, not a single sector in the Ohio economy has outpaced national performance. Ohio's gains were smaller or our losses were bigger than the nation's in every industry. The windfall from almost all of this tax cutting was the wealthiest Ohioans and corporations. We estimate that the wealthiest taxpayers on average have gotten more than $20,000 in tax cuts each as a result of these and other changes, while taxes for the poorest have actually increased. These and other tax cuts since have reduced state revenue by $3 billion a year. And that's just at the state level. At the federal level, too, we've slashed taxes tremendously over the long run. So there's plenty of room for restoring a more balanced approach. The irony is that the wealthiest are already getting a much larger share of our economic pie, even before we take an extra $20,000 a year out of Ohio schools and communities and hand it to them. In Ohio, inflation-adjusted incomes of the top 1% grew 70% between 1979 and 2011. But the average real income for the bottom 99%, the entire bottom 99% combined, fell by 7.7%. I have to make sure you got that. Income for the bottom 99% as a whole fell, while we gave the top 1% an additional $70 for every $100 they already had. In 2011, the average income of the top 1% in Ohio was 18 times as great as the average for the bottom 99%. It's actually not quite as bad as the rest of the country, but obviously it's an insanely lopsided situation. So insane that, again, like every time I use that number, I think that can't be right, and I go back and check it, and it is. There's more money because we're more productive than we were. In Ohio, between 1979 and 2013, productivity increased by 67%, while median compensation actually fell. Let me say that differently. Workers were producing more than 1.6 times as much per hour, and they were making less. So we have the resources. We're more productive than ever. The wealthy are wealthier than ever. Here's the thing. When you think about the challenges that we've taken on as a nation, at times when we were collectively much poorer than today, it's pretty clear that, here's this word again, this is all very surmountable. We took an entirely agrarian, uneducated society and transformed it into an educated industrial society in a few short decades. In 1940, only about 1 in 4 Americans had even a high school degree. Now it's well over 80%. Only 10% of American adults had any college at all. Today it's more than half. And less than 5% of adults had a bachelor's degree in 1940, while close to 1 in 3 did by 2009. We went from a society in the late 1930s where nearly 80% of senior citizens were in poverty and transformed it to a society where less than 10% are. We took a country that was viciously, violently divided along racial lines. We got rid of slavery and Jim Crow, and we passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act so that while we still have a long way to go, you can find integrated classrooms and families and boardrooms and communities all over America. We watched our own river catch on fire, and we passed the Clean Water Act so that in that very river, last numbers I saw, more than 40 species of fish were thriving. We eradicated polio and smallpox, dramatically reduced tooth decay with fluoridated water, drastically reduced the scourge of lead poisoning in kids by better regulating paint and gasoline. I think, given the incredible accomplishments above, that we can figure out how to employ more Ohioans, how to deliver high-quality pre-K, how to install a few more wind turbines, how to reduce our use of polluting fossil fuels, and how to create new markets for transit, renewables, and conservation products. And I don't just think we can, I think we have to. So I wanted to close with a quote from one of my favorite new leaders, Heather McGhee, the 34-year-old woman who now runs the national think tank Demos, on whose board I serve. And if you aren't familiar with Heather, do yourself a favor and Google the time she went on Bill Moyers. It's amazing. So when Heather took the job running Demos, she said, "We are on the verge of something new and wonderful in America. Ours is a country where the ancestral lines of all the world's communities have met and been offered the audacious promise that out of many, we could become one people. Of course, we've never met that promise. And in fact, we too often forget that that is the promise. But I believe that our generation," now Heather's a little younger than I am, but Heather said, "I believe that our generation, the largest, most diverse, most progressive, and most communitarian generation in America's history, will be the one to see that promise fulfilled." So that's the challenge I leave you with. Will we meet that promise and create a truly inclusive economy with opportunity for everyone, or will we leave it for our kids and grandkids' generation? That's the question I leave you with, and I now look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring Amy Hanauer, Executive Director of Policy Matters Ohio. We'll return to our speaker momentarily for our traditional City Club questions and answers. And I would encourage you to start formulating questions now and try to keep them as brief and to the point as possible and truly structured in the form of a question. We welcome all of you here and those listening to us via 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ, PBS, 104.9 WCLV IdeaStream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcasts are supported by the University of Akron. Next Friday, August 1st, the City Club welcomes Mickey Edwards, Vice President of the Aspen Institute. Now, the topic for that presentation is how to turn Republicans and Democrats into Americans. So that should be a very interesting one and some thematic consistency with some of your remarks, Amy. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at our website. That's www.cityclub.org. Today's program is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Media Group, the City Club's official sponsor of politics and policy program. We thank you for your generous support. Today's program is also the George Gunn Memorial Forum on the state of the American economy, made possible by a generous gift from the George Gunn Foundation. We thank you for your support. And today we welcome guests at tables hosted by Enterprise Community Partners, the George Gunn Foundation, Northeast Ohio Community Alternative Program, Policy Matters Ohio, and the St. Luke's Foundation. Thank you all for your support. Now, as promised, we're going to return to our speaker for our question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone here today, including guests. Holding the microphones today are Marketing and Outreach Specialist Kirsten Pianka and Director of Program Stephanie Jansky. First question, please.
Good afternoon, Amy. So wonderful to have you here. The Ohio Supreme Court ruled 4 times that the formula for funding Ohio schools is unconstitutional. And in spite of that ruling, the legislature continues to take money away from our public schools and put them into charter schools, 2/3 of which are failing. Can you talk about what's wrong with that movement, that strategy?
Well, I think I tried to lay out why investing in universal free public education really should be our priority. And Policy Matters has done quite a bit of research looking at charter schools in Ohio. Ohio is one of the most unaccountable states in the way it regulates its charter schools. And we have some really, really badly performing charters that are taking resources away from our public schools. So I think it's a great question. There's a lot on our website that answers it. And I think that what I'm trying to lay out here is a vision of a state that really invests in kids, gets them ready for preschool, gets them ready for K-12, and supports them as they get the higher education or the other kinds of training that they need to thrive in our economy.
Good afternoon. How are you? Your presentation was very informative. You mentioned racial disparities, but you didn't get into great detail on it. Is it your sense that racial disparities are improving? If not, what do you suggest we do about it?
Right. Thanks for that great question. This is one of the most depressing things because I think when I was a little kid, I just always assumed that, of course, racial disparities would keep getting better. And of course, there are many, many strides and ways that we've made tremendous progress as a country. But the fact is that the economic facts that I laid out unfortunately bear much more heavily on the African American community than on any other community, with the possible exception of brand new immigrants. And the Urban League, I have friends from the Urban League who are not here today because they're all in Cincinnati at the Urban League's annual meeting. But the Urban League released a report this week showing that in Cleveland, African American families have half the income of white families at the median in Cleveland. Every year when I do my State of Working Ohio report, I am dismayed to see how far we've sunk in terms of African American male median wages. We used to lead the country in this area, and we now trail the country. And I think the reason that it's obvious why it's so distressing, but I think what we need to do about it, I think everything that I laid out not only makes sense for all of us, but would particularly benefit the Black community because it is African American children who are so often excluded from high quality pre-K, from high quality schools, from high quality early childhood education, and who so often have trouble paying for tuition. Not only that, but strengthening our manufacturing sector, as I laid out, is, it was our strong manufacturing sector that delivered better wages to the Black community than the rest of the country had in a previous generation. And restoring that would help to solve that problem. Thanks for the question.
You mentioned in your talk the current federal minimum wage law. Ohio has a minimum wage of something under $8 an hour. Something less than $16,000 a year, which is hardly enough to decently support a family. President Obama has asked for a federal wage law increase to $10 an hour, and there are some communities throughout the country, Tacoma, Washington, and a few others, which have actually raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. What is your thought if Ohio should take a major step and raise the minimum wage to a decent level, what effect that would have upon the Ohio economy?
Great. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And 26 states have now raised their minimum wage above the federal level. And Ohio does have a minimum wage above the federal level is $7.25 or $7.35. I said it in my talk, and it's $7.85 in Ohio. But as you say, it's hardly enough to live on. There's just a recent study out in the last 2 weeks showing that the states that raised their minimum wage above the federal level this year have had more job creation than the states that stick to the federal minimum wage. And that's not that surprising because, as I laid out throughout this talk, when you grow your economy from the middle out, when you make sure that working people have enough to spend and respend in the economy, it actually can be job generating. But more to the point, having a higher minimum wage creates a floor. It values work. And I think if it didn't fully come through if there's one thing that I want to leave people with, it's that I really value work. My family's here, and they can tell you that at the times when I've been out of work, it's been very miserable for everyone involved. I just think it's part of what gives our lives meaning, and it's part of what enables us to thrive. And when we pay people $7.25 or $7.35 or $7.85 an hour for the work that they're doing, it basically says we don't value work. We don't value the work that you're doing because we don't think that you deserve to earn enough to live on. So I absolutely think that raising the Ohio minimum wage makes sense. I think that it would be better if we could raise it at the federal level. I think it would strengthen our economy, and I think that would improve the lives of a lot of people who are out there working hard every day to pay the rent and put food on the table.
Hi. There are a lot of people in our country who are discouraged workers, so they aren't counted in the national rate of unemployment. How would you propose that we encourage these discouraged workers to seek employment?
Well, I think that the first answer is improving our job market. And, you know, one of the funny things that happens, we do at Policy Matters Ohio, you can find on our website, policymattersohio.org, that every month we do an analysis of the unemployment and employment numbers as they come out. It's called Job Watch. And what's often kind of funny is that just when the economy starts to improve, sometimes the unemployment rate itself goes up, because what happens is some of those discouraged workers start coming back into the labor market seeking work, and then they become counted as unemployed. But what has been happening, unfortunately, in Ohio is that people have been leaving the labor market. They're 53 years old, they got laid off, it's now been 8 months, and they just decide it's not worth continuing to pretend that I'm going to get a job. And, again, if there's one thing I want to leave you with, I just think that that is such a waste of people's energy, their talent, what they have to contribute to our economy. And I really feel that there's just a role for the public sector in coming in and creating some of these jobs so that people see that we want them. We want them in our economy. We want them contributing to our productivity, and we want them to be able to support their families or support themselves.
Ms. Hanauer, in the interest of transparency, would you talk for a moment about what is the budget of your organization and what are your sources of revenue?
Absolutely. First, I would like to say, well, two of my major funders are here today, the St. Luke's Foundation and the George Gunn Foundation, and I'm very, very happy to see them both here, so thank you. Our budget is around $900,000 a year, and I'm willing to bet I may make less per year than you do. But, we're very, very privileged to be able to do that work and very grateful to be able to do that work. About 85% of our funding comes from foundations. Again, the St. Luke's Foundation is now our biggest funder. As of today, I held up the check. I think it's going to be posted on Facebook later, me holding that check. And the Gunn Foundation was our very first foundation funder and has been our most faithful source of funds. But we also get funding from the Ford Foundation, the Sisters of Charity Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, who is here today, and the Public Welfare Foundation nationally. So about 85% of our funding comes from foundations. The rest comes from community shares, and Cynthia Reese is here today, which is a workplace giving campaign where people voluntarily choose where they want to spend their money, and from some unions, some individuals, and some companies, depending from year to year.
Hi.
Sorry. And you can all give at policymattersohio.org. I would also be remiss in saying that if anyone has a check, I'm sure there are people here who would be willing to collect that.
Sorry. I found many of the ideas you proposed very fascinating, and the need for social reform is pretty evident. And so I'm curious, how do you propose that the community get the funds it needs to fund the programs and ideas that you outlined?
Great, great question. Thank you very much. My research director will be happy you asked it. So, as I've laid out, we have reduced taxes for the wealthiest and corporations in Ohio by $3 billion a year. We have reduced the number of brackets. We have reduced the taxes and for the top. So I think that what we really need to do is just restore a more reasonable progressive income tax in this state and restore a more reasonable tax on corporations so that we can pay for these things. I mean, I think that there's a real tendency that can be very distressing at times to just sort of focus on charity or individual solutions. The fact is these are public problems, these are public opportunities, and these require public solutions. And I think a decent tax system is the place to start. You know, and then Merle Johnson, the excellent retired teacher in the room, can fight over where those tax dollars go, whether they go to public schools or whether they go to charter schools. But if we don't have the revenue in our budget, if we continue to say that we would rather give away another tax cut than fund these clearly essential needs, you know, we will regret it. We'll continue to regret it. And the last thing I'll say is that, you know, while we do have good productivity growth, and I'm pleased about that, and we are richer than we ever were, I actually think, and there was a great column in the New York Times this week by Nicholas Kristof saying this, that if we continue to grow our economy in such an unequal way, we actually are going to end up shrinking the pie. Because the fact is that there's only so much that the very wealthiest can spend things on after a while. And so, you know, I mean, it's just true. Whereas there are middle class and working class families all over this state who are dying to replace that, you know, that rusty old car, who are eager to give their babysitter a raise, who wish that they could say yes when their daughter asks for that third pair of jeans. So if we grow our economy in a more equal way, it actually can end up making the pie bigger. And I think that one of the fundamental mistakes that we make is it's a sort of collective action problem, but by growing our economy in a way that gives so much to the wealthiest, we're actually not growing our economy as much as we could be.
Thanks for coming. Amy, you're, oh, okay, good.
Sorry.
Thanks for coming. Last week, Senator Rob Portman was here, and he purported to speak about some of the same issues. And he felt that crime reduction was a key aspect of economic development. He didn't read Keynes. But would you want to comment on that and maybe critique it?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you know, one of the best ways of reducing crime is investing in pre-K, actually. You know, study after study has shown that when kids get high quality early education, they come to school more able to thrive, and it sets them off on the right foot, and therefore leaving them just a lot more options when they get to high school than, you know, than sort of engaging in petty crime and starting down that path. So, you know, I am all for crime reduction. But I just think that the way you get there is not, we have been devoting ever larger shares of our budgets in Ohio and in the rest of the country to incarceration. And that is just not an effective use of resources. Furthermore, you know, Governor Kasich and I think, have some agreement over this issue, and there are experts in the room that have thought a lot more about this issue than I have. But I think that most careful people who take a look at our state budget are dismayed to see more and more and more of that budget devoted to incarcerating people, taking these people out of the community where they can contribute to their families, where they can work, where they can be decent parents, and keeping them in prison where we're paying to keep them there. So, you know, I am all for lower crime. I am certainly for incarcerating anybody who engages in violent crime. But I just think that there's a much better way to go about it, starting with investing in kids.
Amy, Policy Matters' mission is to do policy advocacy, obviously, and you do a great job of that. But the last I looked, government portion of the economy might be a third of the economy, maybe a little less than that. And the major part of the economy is the private sector and to some degree the nonprofit sector. What can those sectors do to deal with these problems without dealing with the government? What should they be doing?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, you know, I think a lot about policy. I mean, it's just where my brain goes, you know, all the time. I'm on a run in my community. I'm thinking about policy. It's just, it's the way my brain works. And I still think that it's the most powerful and best way to address a lot of these problems. But what's very, very clear, and what I will also say is that what's very clear is that there are many policies that can steer the way our private sector behaves. We currently steer the way our private sector behaves toward, you know, I would argue, too much deregulation and too little regulation of what the private sector does. But, you know, there is no question that we have seen companies take leadership. Costco, for example, takes leadership in paying a decent wage. There are companies all over that negotiate in good faith with their workers to make sure that they get paid decently. So, you know, I think anyone who is in a position to issue a paycheck, deal with pollutants, you know, or be in their community has the opportunity to be a responsible and good community member by dealing with pollutants responsibly, by thinking about the effects of what their company does, and by paying their workers decently. And you can make a great profit that way. I think you can make a great profit by being a responsible business owner. And I think there is also a really important voice for that kind of business owner in our political spectrum. You know, right now, I think we have a voice in politics where business appears to be in favor, you know, where business is often portrayed as being in favor of low wages, deregulation, and what I would call a low road approach. And as I kind of argued in the last answer, I actually think the low road approach not only harms the communities that get overpolluted, the workers that get underpaid, it also actually in the end harms all of us because we end up not thriving. And I think that businesses can do much better. You know, as Ford realized generations ago, businesses can do much better when they take a high road.
Hi. In my city of South Euclid, this gets back to the crime question. In South Euclid, we lost so much money to our municipal fund because of the income tax cuts that we actually had to do a safety levy and raise the taxes that way. So the same people who were getting a tax cut were having to pay more money. Can you do a policy analysis on the allocation of resources that illustrates what's happening in a lot of communities to keep their police and fire intact?
So my biggest problem as a manager is that I have so many, I mean, we actually have a really small staff, but they are so energetic and they do so much research that there is no way I can possibly capture all of the numbers that they throw at me in this kind of a presentation. But we have a report on our website called 3 Blows to Local Government that looks at, I think it's a little bit dated now, but that looks at what has happened in terms of the state reduction in the local government fund and the way that states have reduced communities' abilities to deliver the services that our communities so much need. So we love doing that kind of research. We'd love to be able to do more of it. And the story that you're telling is absolutely right. I mean, we have just made it harder for the communities around Ohio to deliver the kinds of things that people need. And, you know, that wealthier communities, communities with some resources, can sometimes find a way of dealing with that by raising some sort of local levy, and I'd often be supportive of those local levies when we do. But the fact is, it gets away from, I think, the fundamental notion of democracy that Paul mentioned, which is that we're then delivering different levels of services depending on what kind of house you're able to buy and what kind of community you're able to choose to live in. I would just much rather see a state where we had a set of basics that we wanted to say every Ohioan deserved, and that requires state leadership.
I want to thank you for coming. It's a real good presentation you put. My question is, how do we go about to make people understand that when we increase the 1% tax cuts for them and then increase my tax to go up, And the first thing people ask you, well, where are we going to get the money from? It does not work in this country. They get all the benefits, but then we suffer, and then they tell you, well, you're not doing enough, and who suffer but the kids?
Right.
How can we make them understand that even though we give them more tax breaks where they have more money, like you said, they can only buy so many cars, but if you hire 1,000 people, that's going to be 1,000 people buying a car, going out to dinner, buying clothes, and they just don't understand. It don't work. That trickle down don't work when you get them a cuts because they're not doing nothing here and they're not opening businesses here.
Well, I think you might have stated it better than I possibly could. But, you know, I mean, I think that that's the question. And I guess to me, the final answer is we are making a choice. We make a choice about the kind of economy we wanted to have. At the time when we were growing the fastest, we made a choice to have that growth be widely shared. More recently, we have made a choice to have that growth go very exclusively to a very small portion of our population. I think it puts in peril the basic notion of democracy. So I think it's just imperative that we address it, and I really appreciate your commitment to it. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a Friday forum featuring Amy Hanauer. I know, by the way, you're not clapping for me, but I'm going to go on. Executive Director of Policy Matters, Ohio. Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.